Imagine waking up one day with the weight of the world pressing invisibly on your chest. The alarm clock screams, the sunlight pushes through the curtains, and the day demands that you rise. To anyone watching, you are strong, dependable, unshaken, the one others call when their lives are falling apart. You smile, you nod, you carry the burdens that others cannot. And yet, when the night falls and no one is watching, tears slip silently down your face. Why does strength so often wear the mask of silence? Why do the strongest people, the ones who carry others, who endure storms without flinching, choose to cry when no one can hear them? It seems like a contradiction, doesn't it? We are told that strength means unbreakable resolve, that resilience is the refusal to falter, that tears are the language of weakness. And yet, those who embody strength in the daylight often collapse in the secrecy of midnight. They hide their trembling hands, swallow their screams, and wipe away their tears before the world awakens. Is it possible that true strength is not the absence of tears, but the ability to bear them alone? Consider this paradox. The strongest people are often the most invisible in their suffering. They are celebrated for their endurance, admired for their composure, but rarely asked the simplest question, "Are you okay?" Because the world assumes they always are. And so their grief takes root in silence, watered only by the tears they do not allow to be seen. But why silence? Why not cry out, collapse into the arms of others, ask for help? Perhaps because their identity has been forged in fire, the fire of expectation, of responsibility, of survival. Somewhere along the way, they learned that their worth is measured by how much they can endure without breaking, how much they can give without asking, how much pain they can hide without complaint. But this raises a deeper, unsettling question. Is strength truly strength if it demands that you suffer unseen? Or is it merely another form of bondage, a prison disguised as virtue? Imagine carrying a mountain on your back. Day after day, you walk among others, smiling as though nothing is heavy, while your spine buckles under invisible weight. People look at you and see a hero, but you know the truth. Your silence is not because you feel no pain, but because you fear what would happen if the mask slipped. Would people respect you less if they saw you weep? Would the pillars you hold up, family, friends, careers, dreams, crumble if you admitted you are not invincible? Would they still believe in you if they knew how close you are to breaking? This is the great contradiction of strength. The world celebrates your resilience, yet it punishes your vulnerability. It demands that you be both human and more than human, fragile and yet unbreakable. And in this impossible demand, the strongest learn to retreat into silence, into hidden tears, into the shadows of themselves. Perhaps you know this feeling. Perhaps you have lived it. Perhaps you have been the one who carries others, who reassures, who listens, who holds the line. And yet, when the door closes at night, you collapse against the wall, and tears escape your eyes like a language you cannot suppress. But here lies the haunting question. If no one sees those tears, do they even exist? If strength is defined by what others perceive, then what do your private moments of collapse mean? Are they weakness, or are they the truest proof of your humanity? Silence is not empty. It is filled with the cries that never reach another's ears, the confessions whispered into pillows, the pain dissolved in hidden sobs. And those who seem unshakable often carry entire oceans behind their closed eyelids. So why do the strongest people cry in silence? Is it fear of judgment, a learned habit of survival? Or is it because strength, as we define it, has always been a lie. This question is not just about tears, it's about the very nature of strength itself. What if everything we thought we knew about resilience, composure, and bravery has been built on a misunderstanding? What if the strongest are not those who never cry, but those who dare to cry where no one can see them, who embrace the solitude of their pain rather than perform it for sympathy? And here is the unsettling possibility. Maybe silence is not their choice at all. Maybe it is the world's. Maybe society has crafted such unforgiving expectations of strength that the strongest people have nowhere left to bring their pain but into the dark. But if this is true, what does it say about Usabo, the way we define strength, about the way we abandon those who seem least in need of help, about the way we measure human worth? The question lingers, sharp and urgent. What is strength, really, and at what cost do we demand it from those who carry the heaviest burdens? Strength has always been misunderstood. We think of it as a wall unyielding, impenetrable, a fortress that resists all storms. But a wall cannot feel. A wall does not ache when struck. A wall does not cry in the silence of midnight. The strongest people are not walls. They are human beings, flesh, nerves, and fragile hearts. And yet, society teaches them to pretend they are walls, to deny their humanity in order to meet expectations. This is the hidden problem. The myth of strength is built upon the suppression of truth. Psychologically, it begins early. Children, who are praised for their resilience. You're so brave, you're the strong one, don't cry, be tough, quickly learn that their emotions are liabilities. The tears in their eyes are not comforted, but disciplined. Their sadness is not heard, but silenced. Slowly, they adopt the role that others impose. The caretaker, the problem solver, the unshakable presence. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist, persists." When the strongest resist their emotions, when they bury pain instead of expressing it, the pain does not vanish, it lodges itself in the unconscious. It festers in the shadows of the psyche, where it grows heavier, darker, more dangerous. They become haunted by the very feelings they worked so hard to suppress. This silence is not strength, it is a mask. And yet, the mask is rewarded. Society celebrates those who keep composure under pressure. Stoicism is seen as noble. Vulnerability is seen as weakness. So, the strongest keep carrying the burden, learning to betray their inner selves in order to uphold their outer image. But philosophy tells us there is a cost. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote of the mask of strength, warning that those who hide their suffering risk being consumed by it. To him, the greatest danger was not suffering itself, but the denial of it. When we deny our pain, we deny our humanity, and in doing so, we risk becoming hollow performers of strength rather than living beings. Arthur Schopenhauer went further, arguing that life itself is suffering, and that the attempt to escape suffering only deepens it. The strongest people, in their desperate attempt to shield others and suppress their own pain, find themselves living a double life, the outer image of power, the inner reality of despair. And every silent tear is a reminder that the contradiction is unsustainable. Think of it, how many leaders, caretakers, or pillars of strength have collapsed in secret because no one thought to ask them if they were all right. How many parents cry into the night after reassuring their children all day? How many friends who seem unbreakable go home to broken hearts? This is the hidden problem. The world's very definition of strength is flawed. It demands that you carry pain without showing it, that you endure suffering without protest, that you be the one others depend on even when you are drowning. But let us look deeper into the psychology of silence itself. Cognitive psychology tells us that human beings develop coping mechanisms to survive overwhelming realities. For the strongest, silence becomes one such mechanism. It is easier to hide pain than to risk rejection, shame, or disappointment. Silence becomes a shield protecting them from judgment, but also isolating them from intimacy. Consider attachment theory. Those who grow up being the responsible ones, the ones who cannot fall apart, often develop avoidant attachment patterns. They learn to rely only on themselves, to distrust vulnerability, to fear being seen as needy. To cry in silence feels safer than to cry in front of others. But in that safety, a deeper prison is built. For what is human connection if not the sharing of burdens? If the strongest refuse to be seen in their fragility, then their relationships remain incomplete or was tilted toward giving, never toward receiving. And here enters Viktor Frankl, who survived the unimaginable horrors of concentration camps. He wrote, "An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior." For the strongest people, silence is their normal reaction to the abnormal demand that they never be weak. But while it may protect them in the short term, it starves them of the very meaning and connection that could heal them. So we must ask, why does the world perpetuate this myth of strength? Why does society applaud the stoic, the silent, the smiling warrior, while overlooking the wounds hidden beneath the armor? The answer lies in cultural conditioning. We have inherited philosophies of toughness, Spartan ideals, industrial values, capitalist demands. In a world built on productivity, efficiency, and conquest, there is little room for tears. Vulnerability is seen as inefficiency. Silence is mistaken for discipline. Nietzsche warned of this cultural danger when he spoke of slave morality, the way society conditions individuals to suppress their true selves in order to serve the collective. The strongest people become prisoners of these expectations, sacrificing their authenticity for the sake of appearing reliable, suppressing their humanity in order to fulfill roles imposed by others. But here's the irony. By hiding their pain, they keep the myth alive. The world never sees their suffering, so the world continues to believe they have none. Their silence feeds the lie that strength means never breaking, never crying, never needing. And so, the cycle continues. This hidden problem is not simply personal, it is systemic. It is embedded in our families, our cultures, our languages. We tell little boys, "Don't cry, be a man." We tell little girls, "Be strong, don't complain." We applaud leaders who show toughness, and we shame those who admit to struggle. And so, generation after generation, the strongest among us learn to cry in silence while the world sleeps. But how long can a person carry unspoken grief? How long can strength survive when its roots are planted in denial? Perhaps this is why so many strong individuals eventually break, not because they were weak, but because they were too strong for too long, too silent for too many years. The psyche can only hold so much before it rebels. And that rebellion, the collapse of silence, the eruption of buried pain, carries consequences far deeper than most of us dare to imagine. Silence is never harmless. What is not spoken does not vanish. It mutates. The tears swallowed in darkness do not dissolve into nothingness. They transform into shadows that move quietly through the psyche, shaping thoughts, behaviors, and even the body itself. The strongest people cry in silence, but silence has a cost, and the cost is often invisible until it is too late. Consider the body. Modern psychology and neuroscience reveal that unexpressed emotions do not simply disappear. They lodge themselves in the nervous system. Cortisol, the stress hormone, muscles tighten. Sleep becomes shallow. The body holds what the voice cannot release. Over years, this silent endurance corrodes health, migraines, heart disease, autoimmune conditions, depression. The tears that never fall outward instead fall inward, eroding the very core of the self. But the physical toll is only one layer. The emotional cost runs deeper. When the strongest people cry alone, they train themselves to believe that their pain is unworthy of being seen. If no one knows, maybe it doesn't matter. If I can hide it, maybe it isn't real. Over time, this self-erasure fragments identity. They begin to exist as two selves: the outer hero, flawless and dependable, and the inner child, weeping in secret. Carl Jung would call this the split between persona and shadow. The persona of the mask shown to the world is celebrated, while the shadow, the vulnerable, grieving, aching part remains suppressed. Yet the shadow does not stay silent forever. It leaks out in subtle ways: irritability, withdrawal, unexplained sadness, sudden bursts of anger. The strongest person may not even realize that their carefully hidden tears are shaping every corner of their life. And what of relationships? Here lies one of the most tragic consequences. By crying in silence, the strongest build walls even against those they love. Friends admire them, partners depend on them, families lean on them, but no one truly knows them. Intimacy requires vulnerability, but if tears remain hidden, so too does the truest self. Imagine being admired by everyone, yet known by no one. Imagine being surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. This is the paradox of hidden suffering. The stronger the persona becomes, the lonelier the soul feels. But the consequences do not end with the personal. They ripple outward into society itself. In cultures that glorify stoicism, entire communities are built on the illusion of strength. Leaders refuse to admit fear. Parents hide anxiety from their children. Workers bury stress to meet deadlines. And as each individual hides, the collective learns to ignore. We create societies where everyone is silently breaking, yet no one dares to speak. This silence breeds cycles. Children grow up watching parents who never cry and assume that tears are shameful. Partners learn to withhold vulnerability, believing it will burden the other. Communities stigmatize mental health struggles, equating confession with weakness. And so, generation after generation, the hidden tears continue. Nietzsche once warned of the danger of a culture that demands endless endurance. Eventually, the will to live itself is poisoned. If life becomes nothing more than the suppression of suffering, then existence itself feels unbearable. The unseen consequence of silent strength is often to spur the quiet erosion of meaning. But here's the darker truth: silence can kill. We know this from psychology and history alike. People who seem the strongest are often those most at risk of collapse. The friend who always listens may be the one who feels most unheard. The leader who inspires others may carry unbearable loneliness. And sometimes the silence becomes permanent. Self-destruction often comes not from weakness, but from unrelieved strength, from carrying so much for so long, without ever being allowed to lay it down. This is why silence is so dangerous, because it convinces the world that everything is fine until it isn't. And yet, even before reaching such extremes, the unseen consequences infiltrate everyday life. The strongest person who cries in silence learns to distrust others. They may smile during gatherings, but inside, they believe no one could truly handle their pain. They may love deeply, yet never allow themselves to be fully loved, because love requires being seen. Their friendships remain one-sided, their partnerships incomplete, their families unaware of the battles fought in the dark. In time, they begin to internalize a cruel belief. I must always be strong. My weakness is unacceptable. My tears belong only to the night. And this belief shapes choices, career paths where vulnerability is punished, relationships where they remain the caretaker, lifestyles built on exhaustion. Slowly, the silence they once chose becomes the silence that imprisons them. Aldous Huxley once wrote that the most shocking fact about war is that its victims and its instruments are the same. The same can be said of silent strength. The strongest people believe they are protecting others by hiding their pain, but in reality, they are perpetuating the very myth that enslaves them. They become both the victims and the instruments of a culture that fears vulnerability. Here lies the haunting irony. The strongest people do not cry in silence because they are weak, but because they are too strong, so strong that they protect everyone else from their suffering, even at the cost of their own destruction. But how long can this continue? How long can oceans remain contained behind closed eyelids? How long can pain remain unseen before it demands to be witnessed? The unseen consequences of silent tears are not just private, they are collective. Every hidden cry is a story untold, a bond unformed, a truth denied. Every silence strengthens the lie that strength means never needing help. And yet, within this heavy truth lies the seed of transformation. Because once we begin to see the consequences, once we begin to feel the weight of what silence costs, the possibility of rebellion begins to stir. For rebellion does not always mean shouting or breaking, it can mean the simple, radical act of being honest, of letting the tears fall where others can see them, of refusing to carry the myth any longer. But how does one rebel against silence after a lifetime of it? How does the strongest person learn to unmask without shattering the very identity they have built? The answer lies not in the destruction of strength, but in its redefinition. And that we will explore next. There comes a point when silence itself becomes unbearable. A point where the mask cracks, where the tears hidden in the night demand to be seen in the light of day. That moment terrifying, disorienting, and roars the beginning of rebellion. But rebellion, in this sense, is not about storming barricades or shouting in the streets. It is subtler, more intimate, more dangerous. It is the rebellion of vulnerability, the rebellion of saying, I am not unbreakable. For the strongest people, this act feels almost impossible. To reveal fragility is to risk everything: admiration, respect, identity. Yet true freedom lies in this risk, because strength without honesty is not strength, it is performance. And to perform forever is to die slowly inside. So how does one break free? The first step is paradoxical: to stop pretending that silence is strength. Nietzsche wrote that one must become who you are. This is not a call to invention, but to revelations, to strip away the masks and face the truth of one's own humanity. For the strongest, this means acknowledging that their hidden tears are not betrayals of strength, but evidence of it. To endure suffering is strength. To confess it is greater strength still. Imagine this. For years you have carried the weight of mountains in silence. Your back aches, your breath grows shallow, but you never stumble in public. Then, one day, you lay the mountain down and whisper, I cannot carry this alone. The world does not collapse. The people you feared would abandon you instead draw closer. For the first time, you feel the strange relief of being held. This is rebellion, to trust that others can handle your fragility, to refuse to be the sole carrier of burdens, to allow your humanity to exist without apology. But rebellion also requires a deeper philosophical shift, the redefinition of strength itself. Society teaches that strength means control of emotions, control of appearances, control of outcomes. Yet history shows us another truth. The great spiritual teachers, the prophets, the philosophers, they were not celebrated for control, but for surrender. Jesus wept. Buddha spoke of suffering as the first noble truth. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, filled his private journals with confessions of his weaknesses. True strength is not the denial of tears, but the courage to let them flow without shame. Consider Viktor Frankl again, who survived the death camps not by suppressing despair, but by giving it meaning. He discovered that the deepest form of rebellion against suffering is not to hide it, but to transform it to purpose, into connection, into testimony. To admit tears is to admit life's weight, and in that admission, to discover meaning that cannot be found in silence. Breaking free also demands the dismantling of cultural myths. We must question the voices that told us, "Don't cry, be strong." We must recognize that those words were never about strength, but about control, about making suffering invisible so it would not disturb others. Rebellion is refusing to inherit these lies. It is raising children differently, telling them, your tears matter. Your pain is welcome here. Your strength is not measured by silence, but by honesty. On the personal level, rebellion can look deceptively small. Telling a friend the truth instead of saying, "I'm fine." Writing the unspeakable in a journal. Seeking therapy not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough to want to heal. Allowing a partner to see you weep. Each of these acts tears down a brick from the fortress of silence. And yet, rebellion is not only about expression, it is also about listening. To break free is to surround yourself with people who do not demand your silence, who do not mistake composure for virtue. It is learning to choose those who can hold your tears without judgment. For the strongest people, this means unlearning years of self-reliance and relearning the radical truth that connection is not a burden, it is survival. But rebellion has another face too, the inner rebellion. Deep inside, the strongest often carry a voice that whispers, "If I fall apart, I will lose everything." That voice is the jailer of silence. To break free is to confront that voice with a greater truth. If I never allow myself to fall apart, I was never whole to begin with. This is the quiet revolution, the reclaiming of the self from the tyranny of expectation. It is no longer living as a performance for others, but as a human being with depth, fragility, and truth. And what happens when the strongest begin to rebel? Something extraordinary. Their tears become bridges instead of barriers. Others see their vulnerability and feel less ashamed of their own. Communities shift. The myth of strength begins to collapse, and in its place arises something more real, compassion. Because rebellion spreads. One tear becomes another, one confession inspires another. And suddenly, the silence that once isolated becomes the conversation that connects. This is why the rebellion of the strongest matters, not only for themselves, but for everyone. For every hidden cry they choose to reveal, a chain breaks, a cycle ends, a future changes. Still, rebellion is not without cost. Vulnerability will expose you to misunderstanding. Some will call it weakness. Some will withdraw. But this too is liberation, because their departure proves they never loved your truth, only your mask. And to lose those who cannot handle your humanity is to gain the freedom to live authentically. So here is the radical invitation. Lay down the mask. Let the tears fall where others can see them. Speak the pain you were told to silence. Allow your humanity to be seen in full. For rebellion is not destruction, it is rebirth. The strongest who cry in silence can become the strongest who cry out loud, teaching the world that true strength is not in hiding, but in revealing, not in silence, but in truth. And in this rebellion lies a final question, one that leads us into the deepest realization yet. If strength is not silence, and vulnerability is not weakness, then what is the ultimate truth about the tears of the strongest? Imagine this: the strongest person you know, perhaps even you, has spent years hiding tears in the shadows. Nights filled with silent sobs, mornings filled with polished masks. A life split between the appearance of resilience and the reality of fragility. But what if everything we believed about strength has been wrong? What if strength is not the ability to suppress pain, but the courage to embrace it? What if the tears of the strongest are not shameful secrets, but sacred truths, proof of a heart still alive, still capable of feeling, still resisting the numbness that society demands? The ultimate truth is this: to cry is not to be weak. It is to be profoundly human. For centuries, philosophers and poets have circled this truth. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, confessed to his struggles in private journals. Nietzsche, who urged humanity to embrace the chaos within, recognized that only through suffering could one give birth to the dancing star. Jung insisted that the shadow hour hidden pain must be integrated, not denied, if we are to become whole. And Viktor Frankl, who survived humanity's darkest abyss, taught that meaning is forged not in the absence of suffering, but in how we face it. The tears of the strongest, then, are not failures of character, but revelations of it. They are the body's rebellion against silence, the soul's way of declaring, I am alive, I am human, I am more than your expectations. Think of it: a wall does not weep. A machine does not break down in grief. Only living beings cry. And so, the tears that fall in silence are the clearest evidence of life itself, of sensitivity, of depth, of capacity for love. The ultimate truth is this: strength and vulnerability are not opposites. They are partners. One cannot exist without the other. Without vulnerability, strength becomes brittle, performative, shallow. Without strength, vulnerability becomes despair. But together they form resilience, the kind of resilience that bends but does not break, that feels but does not surrender, that cries yet continues. We have been taught to worship the mask, but the mask has no soul. True strength lies in the face beneath the mask, streaked with tears, trembling yet still daring to live. And here is the paradox that redefines everything. The strongest people cry in silence because they were taught they must, but the moment they allow their tears to be seen, their strength multiplies. Their honesty invites connection. Their vulnerability sparks compassion. Their humanity awakens humanity in others. The final realization is this: your tears are not the end of your strength. They are the beginning of it. Imagine if society embraced this truth. Imagine leaders who admitted fear instead of pretending invincibility. Imagine parents who cried with their children, showing them that sadness is not weakness but part of love. Imagine friendships where the words "I'm not okay" were met not with discomfort, but with embrace. Imagine a world where silence was no longer demanded, where tears were honored as sacred expressions of being alive. In such a world, strength would not be measured by how much pain one can hide, but by how much truth one can reveal. No one would be forced to cry alone in the dark, because vulnerability would no longer be exile, it would be belonging. But this world can only exist if we begin here, now with you. The ultimate truth is not something abstract, not a distant philosophy. It is an invitation. When you allow yourself to cry, when you permit others to see your humanity, you are not diminishing yourself, you are expanding the definition of strength for everyone. You are teaching by example that wholeness matters more than masks, that truth matters more than performance. Yes, some will misunderstand. Some will still cling to the old myth of silence. But others will see you and feel less alone. They will recognize themselves in your tears, and their own silence will begin to crack. This is how change begins, not with speeches or systems, but with the courage of one soul daring to be seen in its full humanity. And so the ultimate truth is this: the strongest people do not cry in silence because they are weak. They cry in silence because they have not yet been given permission to be fully human. The rebellion of revealing tears is not weakness, but the final act of strength. Let the world believe what it will. Let it call your vulnerability fragility. You will know the deeper truth, that every tear you shed is an act of defiance against a culture that worships masks. That your hidden weeping is not proof of failure, but proof of life. That your strength does not vanish when you cry is born anew. So the next time your eyes fill with tears, do not ask, what will they think if they see me? Instead, ask, what might change if I allow them to? Perhaps everything. Because when the strongest allow their tears to be seen, the world itself begins to heal. And maybe that is the ultimate truth. The tears of the strongest are not private tragedies, but collective medicine. They remind us that strength is not silence. Strength is the courage to feel, to reveal, to love, and to live fully human. And so the question we began with, why do the strongest people cry in silence, finds its answer not in shame, but in transformation. They cry in silence because they were forced to. But they do not have to remain there. Their tears, once hidden, can become the very light that redefines strength for all of us. And perhaps, if you allow yourself to believe this, if you allow your own tears to be honored rather than hidden, you will discover a truth so powerful it cannot be unlearned. To be strong is not to never break.